Welcome everybody to the Agile Leadership and Business Agility Meetup. This is our 6th or 7th event, and today we're hosting Jon Smart. He is here to talk today about his latest book, which is due to be published, I think it's available next month, called Better Value, Sooner, Safer, Happier. Some of his co-authors are also on the call as well. We have I think Miles is here. I can see Zolt there as well. I wonder if Simon's joined yet. Hopefully he's here as well. And there may be an opportunity for them guys to speak as well. The meetup is a 1 hour session, so we're finishing for around about 7:30 UK time. The structure roughly is that Jon will be talking for about that time, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of this for about 10 minutes, and we'll capture your questions in the chat that we can have here as well. So in Zoom, there's a chat feature. I'll just quickly put a note into the chat saying all questions here. So I'll capture them throughout the session, and then we'll have a structured Q&A at the end where Jon can share and answer any Q&A with that in mind. And without further ado, I think I'll hand over to Jon, and he can talk through his brilliant talk around this great book that he's written as well. Jon, over to you.
Great. Thank you, John.
No problem.
And good evening. It's good to see some familiar names on the participants list. So I'm going to talk about Better Value, Sooner, Safer, Happier, joined by my co-authors as well for the book, which is coming out in 13 days' time. We're going to do a Mentee.com poll to start with, get a bit of input, bit of feedback from you. Then we'll have a quick look at the book and just talk a little bit about why we wrote it and what the book is about. Then we'll touch on the top Antipatterns and Patterns, so kind of the key themes of the book, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. So that's the structure. First of all, about me. So for those of you that don't know me, I lead business agility globally at Deloitte. I have joined from industry previously, career in financial services. I was leading ways of working across Barclays Bank globally, and I have getting on for 30 years experience of agile and lean ways of working. Joel, Miles, Simon, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Miles. I am also coming with a pedigree from the Blue Bank in the past, where with Jon, I was responsible for leading ways of working across the investment bank. And as part of the global initiative there, my career has been coming up through the project and program delivery route in the past. And I'm now consulting and training in agility across the UK, both private and public sector.
Hello, my name is Joel Berend, and I worked with Jon, Miles, and Simon at the Blue Bank for a number of years. 15 years of experience in an agile space, and currently I'm product owner at Nationwide, leading on a BVSSH Better Value, Sooner, Safer, Happier metrics and insight dashboard product.
And finally, me, Simon Rohrer. Obviously, again, I worked with Jon, Jolt, and Miles at Barclays. I now work in Copenhagen at Saxo Bank, where I head up enterprise architecture and developer experience. This is my Brexit escape plan. If we're doing numbers, I have roughly 21 years of agile experience since I picked up the Extreme Programming White Book in '99, and I'm still doing some hands-on software development as well, probably more architecture and developer advocacy these days as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So to start, like I said, we're going to do a Mentee survey. So if you could get a device, your mobile, tablet, or laptop or desktop, and go to Mentee.com. If you've got a phone, you could hold your camera up to that QR code, and it will take you to the website automatically. And then when you get there, if you enter the code 7625010. I'm just going to cut across to my browser. And if you could then answer the first question. And the first question is a warm-up question. Who would you rather have lunch with? Elon Musk, Angelina Jolie, will.i.am, Michelle Obama, or Boris Johnson? And I can see in the bottom right-hand corner, we can see how many people have responded. So we currently have 56 participants, and I can see about 30 people have submitted their lunch date. So I'm going to give it a little bit longer. And if you've just joined, at the top of the screen, if you go to mentee.com and use the code 7625010. I can see 33 people have managed to get on and vote. Just going to leave it for a little bit longer.
Don't overthink it. It's just an opener.
I can see we've got 58 participants and 34 votes. So we've still got another 24 to go. Give it a couple more minutes. 37. When it gets to 40, we'll move on. I'm on 38. Let's get a couple more. So looks like we have even draw. Who's gonna cast the deciding vote? We've got Elon Musk and Michelle Obama, will.i.am and Boris Johnson trailing, Angelina Jolie with 5. And Elon pips it at the post. Elon is the most popular to have lunch with. Great. So that was a warm-up question. Moving on now to the next question. So in the context of change, the question is why? Why change? Think of either the organization you're working at now or an organization you've worked at recently where you were involved in change, or there was a change program running. It could be an agile transformation. It could be a digital transformation. It could be cloud, DevOps. I'm just going to hide the results while the votes come in. And the first question is, was there a clear articulation of why change at the organization that you have in mind? So on the right, it's very much, there was a very clear articulation, and on the left, not at all. The second question is colleague engagement on why change. So on the right, there was a high level of colleague engagement, reaching out to colleagues, understanding what the why is, what resonates with colleagues, what the problems are. On the left, a top-down imposition without any debate. The third question is, were the outcomes for change clearly articulated and ideally measurable, which is the following one. Were they measurable? And then not only were they measured, but were they made transparent? Very much on the right, not at all on the left. And then the final question is, was it a case of agile for agile's sake? Either was or is today the case of it's agile for agile's sake, or DevOps for DevOps' sake, or cloud for cloud's sake, or digital transformation for the sake of digital transformation. Very much on the right and not at all on the left. So I'm going to do a reveal. So far we have 33 responses. So clear articulation of why. So that's currently coming in at 3.2 out of 5. So that's not too bad, actually. That's above the median. However, when we look at the slope of that curve, it looks like there's quite a lot of votes. Now it's just gone up a bit on the right. Looks like there's quite a lot around the 2 and the 3 for that one. Colleague engagement on the Y change, it looks like there's quite a lot grouped around the 2. So that's below the median, below the average, below the middle ranking. Clear articulation of desired business outcomes is even lower. Measuring those outcomes is lower again. And agile for agile's sake, we can see there's quite a lot over there to the right. So kind of as I would expect, you know, there's a kind of an average articulation of why, not so great on the colleague engagement, not so great on the outcomes, not so great on the measurement, and quite a lot of agile DevOps cloud digital transformation for its own sake. And that certainly correlates with what we see quite often. Moving on to the next question, the next set of questions, which is the how. So the how question, in terms of how change has gone about, how much is it a case of inflict over invite, a hippo mandate, the highest paid person's opinion? So in the context that you have in mind for the first one, is it very much inflict over invite or not at all on the left? For one size fits all is the second question. So how much is it a case of one size fits all, one set of practices? The third question, how much of it is doing agile rather than exhibiting agility? And when I say doing agile with a capital A, I mean kind of like, are you doing Scrum? Or are you doing Scrum at scale? However that's scaled, be it less Scrum at scale, scaled agile framework. Is it Scrum, Scrum, Scrum? Or is it about agility? The next one is it a transformation project with an end date? Start date, end date, done, we're transformed. The next question is how much of it is a scaling framework or tooling led rather than culture led, behavior led? And then finally, how much is it a case of psychological safety and the ability to fail fast? I can see we've had about 25, 27 responses. So invite over, inflict over invite, pretty much down the middle, ever so slightly to the left. So that's quite even, and that line is relatively even. So we've got as much infliction as we have invitation. One size fits all, that is a little bit to the right of going straight down the middle of the road. So you can see on the line there, we've got quite a lot of skew. It looks around the 3 and the 4. So a fair amount of one size fits all, a lot more of a skew around doing agile rather than exhibiting agility. Transformation project with an end date, that looks pretty good actually. So no, there looks like there's more no's than yeses on that one. That scaling framework or tooling led, looks like there's a very definite peak over on the right. So looks like there's quite a lot of organizations where it's framework or tooling led, and then psychologically safe, a definite skew to the left, which means no, generally a lack of safety. So so thank you for that. That's very interesting. And again, that kind of confirms what we see, which is a lot of organizations taking a one size fits all approach, a focus on, you know, are we doing Scrum right? Being, you know, forgetting about culture and forgetting about people. So imposing a framework or, you know, rolling out Jenkins and Jira and declaring that we're agile. And often with a lack of psychological safety. So that's that pretty much correlates with what we see quite often. So thank you for that. And then finally, free text field. Be interesting to hear a little bit more insight as to what's working and what's not working. So what are the anti-patterns and the patterns that you observe in your context? Now, what I would ask here is if you could submit one challenge per submit, or one thing that's working well per submit. You can submit multiple times. Ideally, include the word anti-pattern or pattern, or just the AP, the letter AP or the letter P, just so that it's clear whether it's an anti-pattern or a pattern. And interested to get your views as to what's an anti-pattern and what's a pattern in your domain, in your context. Great, so let's have a look at some of these. Anti-patterns: leadership, lack of interest. Weaponized metrics. Gantt charts. Yes, Henry Gantt worked with Frederick Winslow Taylor in the early 1900s, which is where the Gantt chart comes from. Used to be called the Mandays quota. Anti-pattern: leaders talk the talk but don't walk the walk. Another anti-pattern: big restructure in the name of business agility. Yes, that's something disturbingly seen quite often around calling something business agility and also letting a load of people go. Anti-pattern: product management not fully engaged. External processes enforcing waterfall. That's interesting. External processes enforcing waterfall. So that's an impediment, very clearly. Anti-pattern: leaders are too busy, which makes me think that leaders are therefore not prioritizing it and are therefore not interested. So therefore, what's the desired outcomes from their perspective? Anti-pattern: agile practices abandoned quickly in a crisis. That's interesting. Often with the pandemic, quite a lot of companies have actually exhibited considerably more agility in a crisis, and then abandon it as soon as the crisis is gone. Lack of a customer journey or well-defined outcome. Leadership engagement: go be agile. Yes, see that quite often. Arms crossed, off you go. Go be agile. I'm not going to change. Anti-pattern: product, application, technology component, as opposed to a product, I'm guessing. Annual project selection funding process. Gantt charts again. The main challenge is leadership commitment to and understanding of. Yes. Slow death by detailed metrics. That's interesting. Trying to be agile in a sea of bureaucracy. Tracking value not clear. Overuse of the word agile. Yes. Tools over culture. That's a common one. Know-it-all consultants. People valuing previous culture. Why isn't championed enough. Program project manager. Okay, great. Now some of the patterns. Team topologies. That's good. And I presume that's referring to Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pai's book, Team Topologies. Feature teams, multidisciplinary teams. Tracking release frequency. Head of ways of working role. That's a key one. People whose job it is to improve the system of work. Curious about value over velocity. Definitely, we're going to talk a bit more about that. Pattern, no trust. Is that a pattern or an anti-pattern? I'm guessing that's an anti-pattern. Let's look for some more patterns. Quite a lot of anti-patterns. Pattern: our group CEO is the perfect role model. Anti-pattern: middle management blocks. Interesting. So there's definitely a role for middle management in this. Manager says team listens. One more pattern: experimental and hypothesis-driven approach. Great, that's really good. So thank you. Roadmaps is another one. So thank you for submitting your anti-patterns and patterns. So that's very useful, and that definitely correlates with what we have observed and some of the lessons learned. So what I'm going to do now is I'm now going to switch across back to the PowerPoint, back to the presentation. And what we've done in Sooner, Safer, Happier in the book, it is a collection of anti-patterns and patterns for business agility. That was an interesting experiment to see what would come out through that Mentee survey. And I think it correlated with what we have observed and the lessons and mistakes we've made ourselves. The anti-patterns and the patterns in this book are from not only from our own, making our own mistakes, they're also from probably getting on for about 100 companies and common anti-patterns and patterns, as you have just expressed in that Mentee survey. Just in terms of the language, a number of you on this call will know there's no such thing as best practice in this domain. It's complex adaptive systems and change is emergent. So there's no such thing as best practice. There's emergence. There are unknown unknowns. Cynefin, if you're not familiar with it, is a great reference for this in terms of sense making and understanding the domain of the work you're in. So the domain here around change, changing ways of working, human systems is top left. It's complex, it's emergent. So you have to have a bias to action. You have to act, and there's no such thing as best practice. So I like the term anti-pattern and pattern. Anti-patterns will give you a headwind. An anti-pattern will make a hard job harder. A pattern will give you a tailwind, and generally it will make a hard job slightly less hard. However, because they're not best practices, there's no one size fits all. So very rarely, occasionally, what is a pattern for a number of companies might be an anti-pattern for one particular company. So you have to apply these in your context. Why did we write this book? We wrote this book to share lessons learned the hard way so that other people don't have to learn the hard way as well. And also so that it's more humane ways of working and more humane ways of changing ways of working. It disturbs me how often we see the top-down infliction of ways of working, the top-down infliction of a framework, the top-down infliction of something like the so-called Spotify model, for example, the top-down infliction of practices rather than principles, and hardly any focus on culture, behavior, psychological safety, empowerment, leadership, with a view that you can just kind of buy your way out of this by changing your process or getting some tooling in. So we wanted to share these lessons learned. And it's very important to me that we are positive. So as well as reflecting on what doesn't work, it's very important to me that we reflect on what we have observed to help. So every single pattern has every single anti-pattern has a corresponding pattern. And the goal of this book is that maybe you self-identify some of the anti-patterns that are in this book. And hopefully the intent is you can use this with your colleagues and say, look, this is what we're doing. And that point around leaders, not walking the talk, the goal is hopefully this can help you on your journey. You can ideally show one of these anti-patterns to one of your leaders, say, look, this is what we're doing. Let's look at the corresponding pattern. Here's a suggestion for what is more likely to be successful. And also with a belief that there's an ever-pressing need for genuine business agility over doing agile. We've had an evolution from the late 80s, early 1990s around Scrum and around doing agile. There's quite a lot of practices over principles rather than principles first. There's quite a lot of the agile industrial complex, as Dan Mesick has written about and speaks about, and Martin Fowler has spoken about. And there's very clearly something beyond doing agile in IT, or even just doing agile, which is around genuine business agility. And to the person who wrote too much use of the word agile, I totally agree. It's one of those words which has a lot of baggage and it's overused, and it isn't about agile, it's about your outcomes, hence the title, Sooner, Safer, Happier. The audience is leaders at all levels, in all roles, and for those helping and those hindering. So this is aimed for people who both at one end of the spectrum have experience of ways of working and would like to use this to help them as an amplifier, but it's also aimed at people who are brand new to the topic around modern ways of working, around Agile and Lean and DevOps and everything else. So the introductory chapters really start from the basics for people who are new to this topic. As I said, the goal is that if you're helping organizations, you can use this book to help you to amplify your messages. And to the point around hindering, again, the intent is you can hand this book to people who are unintentionally hindering progress. And look, here's some suggestions as to maybe what we shouldn't be doing and maybe what we should be doing. And we are committing to planting a tree for every 4 books sold, which is a 10 times carbon benefit via our charity partner, Tree Sisters. So part of the word happier is happier colleagues, customers, citizens, and climate. And so this is our climate promise, which is that we are contributing back to the environment. So 1 tree planted for every 4 books sold. And also this supports women in countries with the lowest rating for gender inequality, or gender equality rather. So this is why we wrote the book. What we are going to do now is we're going to share the kind of the top 8 anti-patterns and patterns. And this correlates to the chapters in the book. So myself, Zsolt, Miles, and Simon will give you a brief overview of these key anti-patterns and patterns, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So first of all, focus on the outcomes. This was a lesson learned the hard way at our previous employer, year 1. We're running an agile transformation. We were using the words agile transformation. We were measuring how agile are you? It was a mistake. It was stupid. How stupid were we? We learned, we pivoted, and we pivoted to focus on the outcomes. Measuring how agile you are, running an agile transformation or a cloud transformation or a digital transformation or a DevOps transformation is not the end, it's not the goal. It's a means to the end, it's not the end. So what are you trying to achieve? So for example, better, value, sooner, safer, happier. Now I found this to work so far in my role at Deloitte, working across all of the industry sectors and working with many companies globally. I have found these outcomes to fit in every context so far. However, it's important for organizations to use the language that works for them. So better, first of all, is quality. Quality is whatever makes sense in your context. It could be incidents, it could be time to recovery, it could be straight through processing errors, it could be rework, it could be customer complaints, it could be whatever is appropriate to your context. Value is why you're in business. It's measured through OKRs, objectives and key results. The KR in OKR is your value measure, leading and lagging value measures. That could be, and it should be value both from the perspective of the consumer of the value as well as the producer of the value. So in the context of financial services, this could be mortgages, and this could be getting more first-time buyers onto the property ladder. It could be more online provisioning of mortgages. It could be provisioning mortgages more quickly. So that's value in the middle. Sooner is kind of really the heart of Agile and Lean in terms of time to learning. It's lead time, throughput, and flow efficiency. Lead time is time from starting work on something to getting it into the hands of the consumer, the customer. Throughput is the number of items of value over a given period of time. And flow efficiency is the amount of time that something is being worked on versus work is waiting. Flow efficiency in most large organizations is about 10% or lower, which means that work is waiting 90% of the time, which is frankly shocking. And this is where the biggest gains can be had, is focus where the work isn't. Impediments are not in the path, impediments are the path. Focus on flow efficiency. It's all of that wait time in between work being worked on. Safer is continuous compliance. It's agile, not fragile. This is GDPR, information security, data privacy, fraud, anti-money laundering, regulatory compliance, your own company's policies and standards. And happier is happier colleagues, customers, citizens, and climate. to give you an idea of some of the order of magnitude benefits that we have seen after a 3-year time period, we saw on average a 20 times improvement in quality, so 20 times lower failure demand. We've seen typically a 3 times improvement on productivity, on lead time. So teams are delivering 3 times as much in a third of the time. And the best teams, we've seen 20 times improvement, sometimes even 70 times improvement. For SAFER, we've seen a positive compliance trend, and we've seen subject matter experts who do this for a living going from spending 80% of their time reactively fixing things that have already broken to 80% of their time proactively and only 20% of their time reactively. And for Happier, we've seen the highest ever colleague engagement scores because it's a more humane way of working. It's a more engaging way of working. And we've seen a positive client net promoter score trend. And the anti-pattern is the capital A, capital T Agile transformation, where you don't have a choice. It's about doing Agile, doing DevOps, and product owners, Scrum Master, stand-up sprints, Post-it notes, or not at the moment, Trello boards. And transformation means capital T, you don't have a choice. So instead, focus on the outcomes. So in our previous context, we pivoted, we focused on these outcomes. This is what we measured, and we look at the improvement trend over time, and people are empowered as to how they improve on these outcomes themselves. There's minimal viable guardrails, some minimal non-negotiable stuff. Within that, people can adopt Scrum, Kanban, Safe, Less, DAD, Nexus, smaller waterfalls, whatever works in their context. And people use their own brains and build a muscle of continuous improvement to improve on quality, value, flow, safety, and happiness for themselves with support and within minimal viable guardrails. So that's the first one. The second one is achieve big through small. Think big, start small, learn fast. The anti-pattern is think big, start big, learn slow. And there are organizations who have done big bang, the kind of big bang agile transformations. You leave on a Friday, you're traditional, you join on the Monday, and everything is new ways of working. Everything is agile. There's one particular large financial services firm I have in mind in the Southern Hemisphere. And it's basically chaos for 18 months to 2 years. And people have a limited velocity to unlearn and relearn. So an S-curve adoption is how humans adopt change. Keep the gradient to change low to start with and apply an agile mindset to agility. The third key pattern and anti-pattern is to invite over inflict. So you may be familiar with Martin Fowler talking about the agile imposition, as I mentioned earlier, and Dan Mesick talking about the agile industrial complex. It's not about one size fits all. It's not about imposing the scaled agile framework or the so-called Spotify model top down. That does not build a muscle memory of continuous improvement, and it's not very motivating. It's external motivation, not internal motivation. The diffusion of innovation curve by Everett Rogers, 1962, you have your innovators on the left, 3 standard deviations, 2.5% of the population, your early adopters, your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards. You start with the innovators, you experiment, you prove it in your context, you generate social proof. That attracts the early majority, who then jump on board, and then eventually you've kind of beaten a path through the organizational jungle that is then possible for the late majority to come on board. The laggards either come on board or they go and work somewhere else. The fourth pattern and anti-pattern is leadership behavior will make it or break it. As per some of your comments in the Mentee survey, when the leaders are disengaged on this, for me, this is almost like a binary. It'll work or not work. If leaders are not engaged, you're going to have very, very muted success or improve the outcomes. I view this as kind of mandatory. A leadership team, the most senior leadership team possible, need to be behind this. If they're not, you'll have a bubble of better ways of working anchored around the most senior leader who is supporting this. And leaders need to role model. They need to generate psychological safety, So going from a culture of fear, command and control, do what I say, instead to experimentation and safety. And servant leadership. So the servant part there is coaching, supporting, helping to remove impediments from out of the way of the teams. And the leadership point is going on the journey. The definition of lead is to guide on a journey. So going with the teams on the journey, exhibiting courage and vulnerability. So this is a conversation that I have quite often with leadership teams in organizations. The fifth key pattern and anti-pattern is the pivot from project to product and from milestones to outcomes. So this is lean portfolio management, for example, is a way to implement this. This is long-lived teams, long-lived multidisciplinary teams on long-lived products, on long-lived value streams aligned to the customer. And going from Gantt charts and waterfall or water scrum fall to outcomes, to OKRs, objectives and key results, ideally written as a hypothesis. And you have nested outcomes, quarterly, annual, multi-year, nested outcomes. So you've got high alignment, and then teams are empowered to run experiments to test the hypotheses and try to maximize value. For this next one, I'm going to hand over to Miles.
Thanks, John. So this is building the thing right, governance, risk and compliance. Those of you in regulated or safety industries will understand this. Certainly my previous employer, we were processing 30% of the UK's GDP every day. But it's not just regulated industries that need to manage this. The GDPR rules affect everyone, and cybercrime is everywhere. So the question is, how do you accelerate and stay safe, stay within your risk tolerance as an organization? In our experience, this was a key challenge. It resonates with many other organizations I know today. So the anti-patterns there includes pattern pairs, let's say, lack of psychological safety within the safety organization. John's mentioned it as a more general leadership challenge. But when we talk to, the head of regulatory compliance, for example, and that individual says when there's a failure, it leads to a witch hunt for who to blame. It's never the process. Even though ISO 9000 says exceptions should be learning events, it doesn't happen. Okay, that leads to a culture of fear. So that's the anti-pattern. To overcome that, building safety within safety, getting to a point where there's a willingness and ability to say stop, even in the face of real pressures. So key message there around safety within safety. Another key message around organizing safety differently, instead of by risk silo, and there are many different risk silos across these large organizations that I've seen and been part of. Organizing your safety and risk and governance organization by value stream as well is a key pivot that we found necessary, and that creates context and understanding. Third challenge is around a fixed mindset to risk. So there's a tension between compliance to a rule versus active thinking like a hacker, thinking about risk. And that tension, we see too many organizations have a fixed mindset to risk rather than the hacker mindset. The pattern that we found effective, we called intelligent control. It is continual compliance, building in compliance checks to your daily work, risk stories, so developer stories to handle risk as part of the daily work off the backlog, rather than treating compliance as some sort of external event that happens for every release, which is no longer possible. Result. Oh, sorry, Simon.
It's okay, Miles. Thanks so much. So continuous attention to technical excellence. Like Dave Farley's steal from the Agile Manifesto for the term continuous delivery, this is, again, a quote from the Agile Manifesto back in 2001. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. And this gets forgotten. I was speaking to someone in our HR department just last week about Agile DevOps and modern ways of working, and he said, oh, Agile, I didn't think that had anything to do with software at all. That's a little bit disappointing, but probably shouldn't be surprising. So the anti-patterns we've seen here, probably the primary one is going faster, leading to going slower. That people are trying to use agile, slicing work up, trying to optimize lead time, but forgetting about the technical excellence elements. Typically, one has to concentrate roughly 20% of time in both paying off old technical debt, this is what Mick Kirsten talks about in Project to Product, but also in taking on new technical excellence techniques, probably techniques, maybe even tools, but spending time on elevating the work of making the work better than doing the work itself. This is what Jean talks about in the Unicorn project. So instead of trying to go faster, well, slow down a little, spend time on improving your ways of working, and you will go faster. That's the pattern, go slower to go faster. Continuous technical excellence is the other pattern. Technical excellence all the time, rather than just seeing agile as this, what Martin Fowler calls hollow scrum, or the agile hollow shell. Remembering that while you can use agile techniques out of software development, most organizations are technology organizations these days. This is what Mark Anderson said, software is eating the world. So don't forget the fact that actually agile is about software development, and agile techniques like test-driven design, pair programming, all of these things really can speed you up. Third, it was really good to see team topologies as a pattern. One of the anti-patterns we see is the misalignment of teams and architecture. So starting to look at the things that Matthew and Miguel talk about, and start to look back even to 1969 and Conway's law, and looking at that alignment of teams and architecture, and both architecting and organizing together for flow, and using Conway's law in your favor. Finally, again, the pattern we've talked about a few times here already is just thinking that tools will solve your problem, that DevOps is all about getting Jenkins and Git and Jira in the organization and then you're done. No, that's an anti-pattern of tools over people. Actually, it's all about people. It's all about smart people, whether you're talking about software development, whether you're talking about using agility in audit. It's all about the people. Tools will help people, but ultimately the tools are there to get the dull tasks, the repetitive tasks out of the way of people, letting smart people do their jobs better. Thanks. Over to Jot.
Thank you, Simon. So the last one is Chapter 8, Creating a Learning Organization. As every previous, it has a set of anti-patterns and a set of patterns. The anti-patterns is information learning silos. So how traditional organizations set up the way, for example, role-based information silo structures that prevent the flow of the information and learning within the organization. How outputs over outcome as another anti-pattern, when predetermined outputs are the focus instead of focusing on outcomes. The bubble effect, which is learning and information silos forming within the organization in various forms, which leads to limited discoverability. It leads to silo mentality, preventing sharing information with the rest of the organization, poor retention and duplication of work, applying a deterministic mindset to an emergent domain. So John mentioned Kinevin. So we are going through and applying an information layer and learning layer to the Kinevin model. And weaponized metrics, I was happy to see that somebody put that as an anti-pattern. So weaponized metrics, which focuses the mind on achieving a target, however that's done, or on activities instead of outcomes. It describes also the underlying causes and the underlying behavioral anti-patterns that lead to these effects. And then it offers a set of patterns we have seen around how to optimize for learning, how to optimize and improve the flow of the information. how to create and establish a nested learning with built-in feedback loops at every layer, at every level in the organization, at individual, team of team level, and organizational level. And then communicate. That's another pattern which describes the various ways of connecting the disconnected information learning bubbles, dissolving those bubbles, and create a better reach of discoverability of learning within the organization and sharing. Being comfortable with uncertainty and encouraging data-led experimental mindset and culture within the organization. And measure for learning, so pivoting from the weaponized metrics and using metrics as a target to measure for learning, so how to create and empower colleagues to have access to a self-serve way of getting information, to unlearning the fear of not revealing data, and using the data and insights and correlations at every level to improve the ways of working and the product and learning about the product. And how all these patterns are leading to or the journey on creating a learning organization. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm grateful to have such fantastic co-authors on this book. And so this pretty much correlates to the, as I said, the structure of the book and the chapters. Altogether, there are 52 anti-patterns and patterns in the book, not intended to be finished or complete or anything like that, because we all know this is emergent. Things are changing all the time. We're learning all the time. We definitely want this to be living, and we are going to be setting up the ability for people to submit on the website their own anti-patterns and patterns that they observe. We're creating a community as well, which I'll show you the link at the end of this session. I'll show you the link if you wish to sign up. And we very much want this to be, our vision here is this is around community and it's around shared learning. And in order to create more humane ways of working and better outcomes. So this is the structure, and then a lot more detail in the book. We also have a collection of principles in the book. It's deliberately a long list of principles so that you can select a shorter list that applies in your context. And now we have about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Thank you very much, John. And also thank you, Simon, Zoltan, Miles. It's been a while since I saw all of you in the same place, so it's been nice to see you today. We have a couple of questions that have come through. One of them was from Femi. He asks, I just heard John mention over a 3-year period for the compilation. His question is, do organizations expect to see these type of results in a shorter duration, say 1 year?
I can see Simon shaking his head. In my experience, for a traditional organization, and it very much depends on, clearly it depends on context. It depends on size. It depends on history. It depends on culture. If it's 5 people who've only existed for, as a startup for less than a year, it's a very different kettle of fish than if it's tens of thousands of people or even thousands of people. For most large traditional organizations, it is a multi-year, it's multiple years for there to be lasting change. And I'm sure we've all seen that it takes mere months or even weeks to slip backwards. So you can have a senior leader who moves on, and you get a new senior leader who is of a traditional mindset, and it's shocking how quickly lots of good progress can be unwound. Hence, I think the importance of data and the importance of measuring the outcomes, because then you've got a very demonstrable feedback loop if the outcomes start going in the wrong direction.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, John. We have another question from Tara here. What methods do you think help with comms in a highly complex, interdependent, multiple project environment?
Just pausing to see if any of my colleagues wish to take that one. Can you say the question again?
Sure. So the question was, what methods do you think help with communication in a highly complex, interdependent, multiple project environment?
I think that in my experience, there's a lot of most environments are highly complex with interdependencies and multiple projects. So I think there's a need to understand more about the specific context, but just from those words, unless Tara wishes to expand a bit, I think methods to help with comms, my personal philosophy is you cannot over communicate on this topic and use multiple communication mechanisms. So as a professor of marketing once mentioned, communicate 3 more times than you think you need to and you're a third of the way done. Communicate, 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 and use every mechanism you can think of. Recognition and reward is very powerful, and that doesn't cost anything. If you can get leaders to within the organization to recognize and reward people, that's a good communication tool as well to generate social proof. Another thing around social proof is the data feedback loop. As Jolt was talking about, that data feedback loop on the outcomes where they're getting better, not weaponized, not a target, and then sharing those.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there could be lots of other communication channels. So COPs, for example, communities of practices, sharing learning through webinars, learning for excellence, inviting teams to share their journeys. So connecting, as John mentioned, the running an award, for example, connecting and conferences, internal conferences. So connecting teams in every possible way, that's what really helps. So creating a dynamic, fluid information flow and having comms people actually to help and having blogs and others running all the time and chat channels where people can communicate.
So that's good. We have a few more questions as well. Here's one from Ben Mundy. How do you embrace this approach while working with or for external organizations who value and expect project and milestone-based delivery?
Anyone else want to take that?
Well, I mean, I think, John, you talked. Sorry, Simon, go ahead.
No.
I'm going to say, you chip in, well, I'll give it a go, but John talked a lot about leadership and the absolute need for the leadership team to be on board. And this will only move forwards if the leadership team are supportive. Otherwise, you will get a little bubble. And if the bubble is too low in the organization, because it's just around some technology, part of the organization, that's going to be a real challenge to shift the project and milestone delivery model. So hopefully that relates. Simon.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it depends on your context. We have worked with organizations and I guess less so for, but certainly with organizations who value and expect project and milestone-based delivery. And I guess some of this is about early delivery, some of this is about understanding what the milestones are. As John says in the book, deadlines really were based on lines where people got shot dead for crossing them. Liz Keogh talks about sad lines rather than deadlines. So, are these milestones actually worth anything, or is just somebody going to be sad if you don't hit them? It's all about context and all about sort of understanding and working with your stakeholders. But typically, these modern ways of working are about delivering early and often, rather than saying, here's a milestone in 18 months, now go away and hit it. So understand that context and try and flip from that sort of milestone deadline-based delivery to delivering something of value earlier, and use that to leverage your way into getting the value out of modern ways of working. That is a pattern, I would say, but again, it's going to depend on context.
And to add to that last thing that Simon said, so there's a ninja move here, a potential ninja move. So there's a series of ninja moves that help you get better outcomes. The potential ninja move here is sometimes maybe it's out of your sphere of influence to be able to change the fact that it's project and milestone based. And Ben, in your question, you said an external organization. So maybe you can't influence it. A ninja move sometimes is nod and smile and give people what they're asking for. But in the meantime, get on and work with modern ways of working as much as you can in your sphere of influence and start showing people value and a working product. And this is what I've done many, many, many times. And it doesn't take very long because people are not doing this to be difficult. They're doing it because they just don't understand another way. It doesn't take long before they start forgetting about asking for the project plan. And they say, oh, right, great, awesome. What can I have in the next 2 weeks? Can I have this in the next 2 weeks? So, and at the beginning of a changing culture, definitely watch out for saying no to someone who's asking for project plans, because the antibodies will attack and kill this strange new way of working, these strange people who are trying to do things differently. So sometimes you need adapters around the bubble. You need adapters where you nod and you smile and you give people the Gantt chart, even though you've only spent 30 seconds on it. And generally people will trot off quite happy with that Gantt chart, even if it's meaningless.
Thank you, John. Charles just sort of mentioned there, stealth transformation can be a very good thing. Quite an interesting comment, definitely. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I think we've got time for one more question. And it's one from Stuart here. How do you go about measuring that value delivery in a complex environment? I think it kind of follows on from the previous question as well there, so I think it's a good one to round up on. Yeah,
so value delivery, the pattern there that I feel works is, and that we've implemented a number of times, is this is the pivot to OKRs, objectives and key results. I think it's even a little bit more than the vanilla definition of an OKR, because it's articulating the outcome as a hypothesis. And the KR is the key result, and that's the value measure. And the complex environment, this is the complex environment. This is the sweet spot for this way of working, is a complex environment with complexity. Again, it's top left in Cynefin. If you're not familiar with Cynefin, it's worth having a look at it. It is complex, it's emergent, it's unknowable. So because it's unknowable, you really need to articulate your endeavor as an outcome hypothesis, because you haven't done it 1,000 times before, you've never done it before. So you articulate it as an outcome hypothesis, you have key results, leading and lagging value measures. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the leading measures could be clicks on a website, the number of inquiries, and the lagging measures will be products sold. It could be first-time buyers on the property ladder, and ultimately also financial in terms of profit, margin, revenue, customers, and so on, but not only financial. So in short, objectives and key results is a great way to measure value. The other thing is, because they're at least quarterly, you've got a regular focus on value delivery. So you're slicing the elephant, and that gives you business agility, because if those value measures are not going in the right direction, you can pivot. And that's not about Scrum. It's not about SAFe. It's not about less DAD Nexus. That's about how are we doing on our outcome value measures, and then that gives you business agility.
It's a great answer. Thank you very much, John. There's a couple of extra questions that are left over, and I believe, John, you said that if anybody's got any questions that are left over or would like to get any more details about this, to connect with you on LinkedIn or Twitter. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good, thanks for your answer, brilliant. We'll share the link out for your LinkedIn and Twitter. You can join the community, as Miles has posted into the chat there. There's an opportunity there. You can also purchase the book at the moment as well. and pre-order for the published date on the 10th of November. So not long to go yet before we get these great lists of anti-patterns and patterns. Thank you so much. And thank you to Simon, Zolt and Miles for stepping in and co-hosting alongside John as well. Thanks again, John, for taking your time out today, and thanks everyone else for joining. We're going to be taking a recording of this and putting this onto YouTube in the next couple of days, so you'll be able to replay this back or share it with anybody else who's interested in learning more about sooner, safer, happier. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.